Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Esop Sofa. I'm your host, Darren Smith of Global Shares, who, as of 11:28 a.m. last Thursday, became a JP Morgan company. So exciting times. As always, I get the easy job today, and I'll be discussing recent Newspad editions with two great guests on my sofa. So first up, I have Cathy of CMS, our legal expert on the panel, ensuring I stay out of jail and keep compliant with all questions and answers. Law to Cathy is like Love Island to my wife, so I'm looking forward to taking Cathy for a chat shortly, and I'm sure she won't hide away from any of the tough questions we throw at her. We've also coupled up with Tom Hicks from Fiducia, specialising in employee incentives, including trust services and SIP administration. Tom has just landed after 3 weeks travelling the world, so I'm sure it'll be plain sailing for him today. He'll be flying with his answers, and I'm looking forward to this session really taking off. But before we start, these events are only possible due to the generosity of our members and sponsors. So a huge thank you to the Esop Centre members and the SFS Club sponsors who allow us to range widely across technology, economics, finance, even Love Island jokes. So allowing me 45 minutes of really bad dad jokes as well. Throughout today, we're going to ask lots of questions of the panel and there'll be lots of time for questions as well. But before we start, I have a few housekeeping notes. So just to let you all know, recent issues of Newspad are available to download in the chat and also on the event webpage. Really nice and simple. Another thing to make you aware of is the webinar's being recorded. So there's a video and a podcast that will become available usually within 48 hours. So if you need more time to take in those Love Island puns, you can watch this over and over again. You can even take it on holiday with you, listen to it on the beach, or if you need to help get to sleep, whatever you want to use it for, it's all yours. Throughout this panel discussion today, you can ask lots of questions, so please do get involved. I always find it's much more entertaining, much more rewarding if we get lots of questions. And I always say there's no silly questions, just silly answers. Okay, so please do get your questions into us. And it's really nice and easy to do. Just go to the GoToWebinar chat facility and send your questions. You'll see a questions section. Okay. Any of the questions that come in that are nice and easy, I'm happy to answer. All the tough ones, I'll be passing over to Tom and Cathy. So a big round of applause to my sofa guests today, Cathy and Tom. Okay, so let's have a look first of all then at the hot topics since our last Esop sofa. Well, it feels like an absolute lifetime ago, I won't lie to you. So much has happened. There's been a booming free share awards that continues post-lockdown, and you know, we really see companies rewarding their employees for loyalty. There's been huge rises in cost of living. I think that's been really topical, and we'll go into a bit of detail about that. Flexible working has become the norm, and we've seen windfall gains. We've seen Ukraine and Russia happen since our last event, and there's talk of share schemes stagnating. So we're going to look at today how we can revitalise those plans. It's a real hot topic. And then finally, there's been lots of takeovers, potential takeovers and IPOs. Only yesterday, Ted Baker were in the news after agreeing a deal with Reebok, I believe. Okay, so enough from me. Let's dive into those headlines. And where better to start than the lovely topic of cost of living. Cathy, I know you manage lots of different clients, and I'd love to know, what are you seeing of your clients? How are they supporting their employees through this tough time? And is there any link to their share plans?
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, obviously we all know our clients, and in the news that there are a lot of companies who do want to support their employees. So yeah, a lot of our clients and a lot of companies are providing cash bonuses to help through the cost of living crisis. I did see that a lot of the law firms are handing out little cash bonuses if anyone from CMS is listening. But on a more serious note, I don't think that equity, or I haven't seen equity being used to help immediately in the cost of living crisis, and it is because of the timing aspect. People need cash in their hands to pay those bills. That's not to say this might not be something that happens in the future. As you mentioned, the free share awards are, you know, growing, and long may that continue. That will be a helpful way, and I think if the SIP is kind of reassessed, as we might touch on later, that would help with that. So not to say that equity isn't being used, it might be. interestingly, a couple of the, and maybe not in direct response to the cost of living, but we are seeing a lot of secondary sales, which are allowing option holders in private companies to cash out. And it might be that there is a trend for companies to use that as a means to get cash on a future investment. So that's a hopeful area. And maybe people are looking at how, instead of having exit-based plans, there might be a way to provide an annual drip feed. So there is hope that equity can be used, but watch this space.
Brilliant. So I've been at quite a few events recently where I think Aviva spoke at one where they're giving shares to all their employees, and there's a number of companies where they're giving free shares out. Do you think that's more to do with lockdown then, rather than it's just hit nicely in terms of the cost of living crisis? Would you say it's more to reward the loyalty through lockdown?
I would say so, because I think with equity plans, especially in larger companies, it's like turning around a large tanker. I don't think they've been able to respond as quickly to the cost of living crisis. So I think there is definitely an element of a lockdown hangover.
Brilliant. Okay, one other event I went to, there was a really good session on from Halfords. Tim O'Gorman, the company secretary, talked about a hardship fund where basically throughout lockdown, the pandemic, Halfords did really well with bike sales. So they had lots of cash, and they wanted to put that into a hardship fund to really support employees through, due to furlough and things like that. How could they help their employees? So they put 1.5 million into a hardship fund, which there was a committee set up, and employees could request support for their bills, rent, food, travel costs, anything where they really were struggling, and the company could help them, which I thought was just amazing. There was talk also of they've only spent half of that money throughout the year, so it's helped hundreds of people, which is just amazing. But at that event was a registrar, and they mentioned to Tim, when he looks at putting more money in, could you look at dormant assets, to fund these hardship funds? Which got me thinking, Tom, obviously from a trust point of view, is there anything that companies can use to really support their employees through these tough times?
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Morning, everyone. I think, yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it. And as Cathy said, she's not really seen equity being used. Obviously, with an EBT, typically the asset is shares in the company, in the settlor company, an employing company. But in principle, absolutely. I mean, I think, one of the key words we often use around EBTs is flexibility. I've not seen a trust, an EBT, specifically used in relation to something like what Halfords are doing, which sounds very, very positive. Seen similar things in relation to Ukraine, actually, where companies have Ukrainian employees, where money is set aside. I think, what you do occasionally find is you have EBTs that effectively have excess value in them, and sometimes value stuck in the trust, for want of a better word. And certainly in those instances, that kind of initiative could be, the EBT could be used to satisfy that. And obviously the usual advice is there in terms of speaking with the trustee early in relation to anything, not committing to anything before you've spoken to the trustee. But in principle, yes, absolutely. And the same with equity. I mean, the trust certainly for listed companies is often, and for private companies is often a hedging tool. And actually what you might find is that the trust has sufficient assets to allow for whether it's shares or cash to be used to help people in the short term. Obviously a listed company, liquidity, you can sell the stock and get value to the employees. So I think in principle, absolutely. I think just need to be mindful of not looking for the trustee to take on an existing liability that the company might have created in relation to an initiative like that. And again, I think the key thing in relation to any of those things, if a company has an EBT and they're looking to implement that kind of initiative, have a chat with the trustee. I mean, any good trustee will be happy to consider something as long as the rationale is there, as long as it fits in with the powers. Ultimately the EBT is there to benefit the employees, former employees and families. So and with that flexibility, yeah, have a conversation. If there's a company looking to do something like that, I would just having an early conversation with the trustee.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much. And if anyone in the audience has come across anything like that, please do drop us a line there, and we'll read it out. It'd be really interesting to hear any others. Okay, no, that's great. Thank you very much, both of you, on cost of living and ways to support employees. Another thing in recent Newspad, which, you know, I'm strong believer in all employee plans. There's been a lot of talk about how we can improve all employee plans. You know, there's been talk of reducing the term of products, you know, what we can do with bad leavers to engage them more, looking at ways to making ShareSave always exercisable and not underwater, with like a look back facility, which is something that they use in the US. And most radical, I thought, was auto enrollment. Cathy, what are your thoughts on how we could revitalise all employee plans?
Thanks, Darren. I thought it was really interesting, actually, the number of areas that are being looked at. Like traditionally, I think we're all familiar with the fact that the SIP really should be reduced from 5 years to 3 years, and I kind of think that's a no-brainer, and the sooner we can do that, kind of the better. I then thought that the leaver scenario was actually really a great idea, because, you know, I'm going to say the younger people, but you know, the next generation of employees, they're not like my dad, who, you know, like waited around for it. Yeah. I was going to say that, but people are waiting around to get their golden carriage clock. People are moving on, and that's not because they're dissatisfied with their current employer. It's to take up opportunities, and that's kind of how things are expected. So allowing leavers who will traditionally be bad leavers to be treated as sort of semi-good leavers, allowing some vesting, retention of their awards, I think is a really interesting idea, and I think it would really modernise the SIP and the Save As You Earn. I really liked the auto enrolment idea. Like, yeah. I think that definitely has legs. So it would be interesting to see where that goes, because I think that is very beneficial, because whilst we're all familiar with share plans, a lot of employees, they don't want to read, they don't want to look, even though there's amazing communications. It's just another thing on the to-do list. So I think that has legs. The rebasing of the ShareSave awards that are underwater, maybe with my legal head on, I find that maybe quite complicated to do in practice. I think who would be the arbiter of what that repricing should be? I don't think there's resources or revenue to provide a valuation function or something to tick that off. So I like the idea in principle, but I think that might be quite hard to implement. And even if it was, hopefully by the time it comes into place, we'll be out of this recession and back in smooth waters. Yeah,
I mean, for auto enrollment, you know, I look back when I was 19, many years ago. I know everyone, but when I was 19, you know, if I'd have auto enrolled and had some savings, you know, I had the most cash rich I'd ever been at 19. Now with 3 children and a wife, it's very expensive, so I don't see any of my money. But you know, if I'd have been taught early on that savings, you know, that importance of savings has been great. And we also know that, you know, stats show that only one in three people who have a ShareSave, for example, only have ShareSave as their savings, so nothing else. So if we could lift that so that everyone has some savings, they've all got that safety net then, so that when we do get hit by the cost of living crisis, when we do get furloughed, we've got that extra bit of money to as a safety net. So I think the auto enrollment would be amazing. How that would ever get passed, I don't know, because you could argue why is it in the share plan, not in the savings plan. But as someone who loves ShareSave, as you all know, I think it'd be amazing. I always say, you know, with the look back, so I think the great thing about ShareSave is it's really simple. I was once doing a presentation, and I've said this analogy a few times on presentations, where I did a presentation to 100 people in overalls and face masks, all about ShareSave, and at the end, someone just put their hand up and said, so it's like betting on an horse, and even if it loses, you get your money back. It sounded like me. So yeah, basically that is ShareSave in a nutshell, and it's so easy to understand that I don't think there's less take up because of that. I think the take up's strong because of the simpleness of ShareSave. I think if you could get around the fact that people say, oh well, I'm going to be millennials, for example, I'm going to only be here a couple of years, there's no point in me joining, I won't see the benefit. So I think there's real legs on the bad leaver one there. Okay. So yeah, no, I think there's some really great ideas out there. And, you know, I know a lot of people are championing this, so long may it continue, and let's see how we can improve it and bring it into 2022 as well. So no, that's great. So Tom, I know from fiduciary point of view, you do our employee SIP trusteeship and SIP administration. Have you seen a change in approach for share incentive plans with cost of living challenges coming back on the pandemic? And is there anything you'd love to change on SIP?
Yeah, there's nothing fundamental that I've seen changing, to be perfectly honest. I think you mentioned earlier, Darren, because obviously you guys, Global Shares, do SIP administration as well, but a larger number of free shares being issued, perhaps on a more ad hoc basis. I think, to be honest with you, I mean, as Cathy said before, it doesn't really help to give immediate help with cost of living. I think what we've seen is where that has been done, it's more as a kind of thank you, kind of an acknowledgement of more around COVID, obviously, in terms of it's been challenging times, and a kind of thank you to the staff who have you know, worked through it with the business. So we've certainly seen that. I think from a SIP perspective with cost of living, I can't really see a way that it can help in the short term. I mean, obviously, if people have been investing in their SIP for years, then, you know, there might be something coming through for them. But in the short term, I think it's a bit challenging. But again, I mean, you know, often companies who have SIPs, they might have discretionary plans and an EBT. And I think, you know, one company we worked with recently did an ad hoc release of shares to all employees. Obviously, there's tax. So my computer's going funny. There's tax implications there for the employees, but that's the world we live in. So I think if a company is looking to do something around shares that will help in the short term for cost of living, I think it's more probably the discretionary trust and an immediate release of shares. It's very doable, and it's very doable in tight time frames. But again, you just got to have those conversations with your advisors and trustees and make sure it all works. But in principle, I think, yeah, SIP probably not. EBT, yes, I would say absolutely. But lots more free shares, we definitely. So you've seen that as well, Darren, I assume.
Yeah, no, definitely, and that's going global as well. So rewarding everyone, and the interesting thing is that everyone's being rewarded the same value in a lot of companies as well. So in certain jurisdictions, £500 worth of shares is life changing, whereas in the UK maybe not as much. So it is really interesting to see that approach as well, and also including the same value whether you're part-time or full-time. I think that's another really good way of inclusivity. You know, that's it's really good to see. On the SIP, what I would say, and I've said this again over the last couple of years, I think if anyone's ever looking at introducing a SIP and getting really good buy-in, you know, from all levels, in the past, if it's just partnership shares, you'd often see the higher earners investing more because they're getting the higher rate tax benefit from that. But what we're seeing more and more is if someone introduces a match maybe the first £20 or £50 with a 1-to-1, or for every one you get 2, rather than matching, you know, for every 2 you buy you get 1 over the £150. That way you're really engaging all levels, and people who can only afford £50, they're getting the full benefit of that. And that's where we see take up really rise from around a 12.5% closer to a 25 to 40%. So, you know, little things like that. So for the same cost, you're getting more engagement from employees at all levels, and you're getting better take up. So that's something I would recommend. Okay. So we've looked at cost of living, we've looked at all employee plans, and one huge change this year has been flexible working. You know, I'm sure every company here has got different rules now, whether you have to be in the office 2 days, 3 days, or you don't even have to be in at all. Some have to be in full time as well. The pandemic's definitely accelerated flexible working, and in particular, employees are increasingly engaged outside an employer's home country as well. On this week, one of the team has asked to see if they can go work in Malta for a week, which is great. I'd love to have done that before the 3 children came along, I'm sure. What are the particular challenges and opportunities when offering equity awards globally, Cathy, would you say?
Thanks, Darren. I'm very jealous of your employee. I have a friend who's just come back from a month working in Crete, and I wish I had done something similar. But yeah, I think it's more the this has been a change for private companies from an equity perspective. Are larger listed companies, as you both know, who operate globally, have got great administrators and tax and legal compliance set up. So they are kind of set up for that, although it has expanded. I think the real interesting part is those companies, which are normally the private companies, who I call like stealth global equity plans now, because they don't realize they operate a global equity plan. But then as soon as you have a few people in America, Australia, Malta, you do have to think about your planning in global terms. So it's just reminding our clients that the tax system doesn't work the same all around the world. There might be withholding obligations in some countries where that wasn't expected. There might be uncapped employer social security, and that will be a cost to the company and does come as a surprise to some companies. I think in the UK we're the only country that allows the cost of employers' social security to be passed on to the employee, so it can be a real cost to the employer. So they're big things to watch out for, as well as kind of the legal compliance and whether there are any filings to do. Like, I've only relatively recently, and I've been in this game a long time, realised that there's annual returns to be done in Australia, in Ireland, with penalties and what have you, and also the exchange controls and securities laws regulations, can be a bit of a nightmare. And like, for example, in Australia, the securities laws, for a private company, I think there can be criminal sanctions. So, not to scare people, but it's something to bear in mind. And then the other thing is, just touching on that, is the use of PEOs, or employers of record, which is brilliant. So with an employer of record, instead of having to do the traditional route and set up a permanent establishment, or go down the consultant route, which can be a little bit tricky depending on if that person is considered to be an employee, PEOs basically act as the employer of record in that country for that company, which is great. They do payroll, benefits, all the contracts. It's amazing, but it's quite a new area, so equity plans might not be adequately catered for. So my 3 top tips, if you are dealing with a client who does use a PEO and you are offering them equity, is 1, check the terms of the engagement with the PEO cover them processing the equity awards, because a lot of them might not. Secondly, tax. Have to think about that there might be withholding obligations and how that actually happens in practice. And also, tax advantage plans might not work because the employee is not an employee of the issuer. So if we had a US company offering awards in the UK, they couldn't offer EMI, for example. And then also, the third thing is, so that's the tax. And then the third thing is that the sort of, you have to think about the legal compliance. So, for example, the employee exemption to the European prospectus regulation wouldn't work here. Although, given that the fact that the PEOs would be quite small, it doesn't really matter. But there's maybe some legal quirks to think about when the employee is not an employee of the issuer. So, yeah, there's I think it's wonderful that equity has been offered to everyone. But yeah, there are a few hoops to jump through, but nothing insurmountable. Just have to do a little bit more work, I think.
Brilliant. Made complete sense. Love that. Thank you very much, Cathy. Just to let you know, we're also getting questions coming through. Now, these are great questions. So what I'll do is I'll leave those for 5-10 minutes and we'll come back to those. We've got a few more questions on the panel, but please keep getting those questions in because there's some great ones coming through. Okay, so I think one of the things I'd like to move on to now is share prices, really. Whilst appearing to be in the process of rebounding, Tom, we've seen a dip over the last 6 months or so. Do you see a shift in Ebt activity during these times of lower share prices?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the key thing, again, I kind of touched on it before, but one of the key functions of the Ebt for many companies is as a hedging tool. It's a hedging mechanism for their awards, and a lot of companies will have a fairly stringent hedging strategy, but actually, again, the word flexibility comes in. The trustee can be asked at any point, obviously within certain parameters, to consider going into the market, buying shares. what we used to see more so in the past is, in April or whenever the company is doing its annual grant, it will go into the market and buy maybe 70%. But I think over the last few years particularly, and particularly around times where there are dips in share price, there is a bit more flexibility or fluidity being demonstrated by companies in terms of the timing of going into the market. I mean, clearly, companies want to pay as little for the shares that they're going to use to satisfy awards as absolutely possible. So we have seen an increase in acquisitions of shares in the market for the purpose of hedging awards, to be expected. Again, I think, what I would say is words of encouragement to companies is, keep an eye on your hedging strategy. Be mindful that there is flexibility around when to go in. There's often a finance team who will have a good understanding of when might be an opportune moment to get into the market. Trustees can get into the market pretty swiftly, no matter which mechanism, funding, whether it's loan or gift or whatever. But that's something we've seen a big increase in. I think the other thing around times of low share price, I mean, obviously employees want their shares to be worth as much as possible when the vesting event comes. But actually creating a mechanism and facilitating an easy way for employees to hold shares, the balance of shares after tax, or assuming it's discretionary award, on vesting is something that, again, I would encourage, so that employees can spend a bit more time waiting for the price to be right for the sale of the balance of shares. So normally facilities, I mean, I think really they've really picked up again over the last sort of 5 years or so as a mechanism for simplifying employee shareholding. But it's something, it's not just a benefit to the company potentially in the short term. Okay, it might not be great for certain employees, but on grants, perhaps they're getting more shares than they might have done as well. And there are positive aspects. Whilst no one likes dips in share price particularly, there are positive things to be taken from it, from employee side, company side, trustee side. So I think it's just being aware of what those are, and again, just talking with the right people to ensure that you're doing what you need to do at the right time.
Brilliant. I think we're talking there about share prices rebounding. I think one of the questions from the audience, so thank you very much, Fred. Will higher pay rises coupled with frozen IT allowances encourage boom time for the SIP, and I guess the lower share prices as well? Do you think we're going to see an increased take up in SIP, Tom?
I would hope so. I mean, I think there are some numbers released recently in terms of SIPs generally, and I think it's been, for what I saw, it's been fairly static. I mean, for me, I think the ideas that Cathy shared earlier would be far more likely to have an impact on take up. For me, a SIP's a no-brainer, but 5 years to wait for it to really get its tax efficiency benefits is too long. So I think quite possibly it's been fairly static from what I've seen, but there are other things, as Cathy said, that can be done that I think would far more impact on the take up numbers.
No, definitely. Cathy, is there anything you'd add there, or is he nailed it?
Yeah, no, Tom's nailed it. I agree completely. I think the SIP just needs a rebranding. It needs a bit more of a PR. So hopefully it can be kind of relaunched if they do take up any of those proposals.
Brilliant. No, it's great stuff. And I guess that leads on to the next question as well from Mikey. So thank you very much. Another one's just come in, just as I'm about to read that one. If we have a share plan for UK employees, will it be a wise choice to offer it to US employees as well? So Cathy, what's your take on that? Should you offer an unapproved share save globally?
Well, I think just from a HR perspective, absolutely, that should be. And we are seeing quite a lot of global share saves. It is obviously there are different taxes and there has to be thoughts about how that's structured and whether the tax efficient Section 423 plan in the US would fit with it, or whether actually sometimes I think companies, whilst they should know about the tax shouldn't actually drive the decision, because even if it wasn't the most tax efficient structure to offer in the US, it's still a benefit. And I think we should be looking at it on those wider terms. And I think that the cherry on the top would be to try and structure it in a way that is tax efficient. And whether that's having a different plan in the US to the UK or rolling out something the same, I definitely think it's positive.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me here is that every company is different. So, you know, what are your objectives of the plan? If you want everyone to have a similar product, then, you know, Shares are perfect globally. But you've got the fossil-free plan, like Cathy mentioned, if you want tax efficiency, which I think is a couple of years rather than the free 5 years with ShareSave. And then you've got the global share purchase plan as well, which more and more companies are bringing in. So it's a bit similar to the SIP in the sense that you own shares. So yeah, different options there for sure. I'll go back to some of the questions, and we'll come back to more of the audience questions. But please keep putting those questions in there. We've got about 12 minutes left for those questions, which will be great. So in terms of the Newspad, we'll go back to there. There's been a lot in there around takeovers and IPOs, and these result in exits for share plan participants. So I guess, what are the common issues arising at the time of exit, and how can we help avoid these? To Cathy, that one.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, so in short, I think sometimes it's just to get a time machine and get it right from the beginning. Basically, when there's any large corporate event, it puts a focus on the share plan and how it's been operated and how it's been documented and what records have been kept. And so I think that us as professional advisors need to really try and get in front of clients as early as possible if we can't get in that time machine. And that means having conversations. Sometimes I have to have difficult conversations with my corporate colleagues because they don't involve me until later on in the deal. And actually planning from the beginning is key, because equity is the main part of it. And just because it's under a share plan doesn't mean it's any less important. And so finding those opportunities early, you know, things like how the deal is structured can be impacted. We had one recently where there was a really the CSOP, but there's loads of value in the CSOP, and it was so valuable that actually what we had to do was go back and restructure the transaction to make sure that it was tax efficient, and it was a race against time. So get involved at the beginning. I think Tom's nodding as well, because the EBT doesn't get involved until the end, and actually there's loads of opportunity to think about how EBT shares can be used, and to have conversations with people like Tom as to making sure that those shares aren't trapped in the EBT, that maybe they can be used, you know, not necessarily just for the plan they were intended for. You know, it can be that they can be used for a wider purpose for the employees. Again, that's something that needs to be discussed at the beginning. And apart from the time machine point, I think it's for private companies, it's making sure the founders are in the right place early on. I can count on one hand how many times a 431 election or lack of a 431 election has not been an issue on a deal. So I would always say, just even if clients get bored, ask them about 431 elections. It's easier now that the process for 431 elections is changing, but that doesn't change the past, and it is always a headache to sort out quite early. So yeah, just talk, do lots of talking.
I feel I've been brainwashed with 431 elections. Honestly, I think so everyone else is going to be like, never forget it ever again. Yeah, Tom, I think it's perfect timing to add you in there.
Well, yeah, if I could just add to that, I mean, I think Cathy again is absolutely right. It's about communication, it's about talking, it's about planning. You know, something we do still see on occasion are, you know, management incentive plans and similar plans where the legal title goes to the employees, and I think, you know, it's not as often as it used to be, but nominee facilities alongside the trust can significantly ease that administrative burden at the time of an exit event, whatever that looks like. But again, yeah, as Cathy says, planning, talking well in advance before you think you need to start that conversation, and it will significantly increase the probability of things going as well as you want them to.
Definitely. Going back to your time machine, Cathy, I think it's perfect timing for you both to become Mystic Meg, and then tell me what the future holds before I go to the great questions we're getting in from the team. So what's the future hold, Tom, in EBT SIP world? What we're going to see over the next 12 months?
I wish I knew, Darren. It'd be very.
You'd be back on your holidays for 3 weeks.
Yeah. If I knew, then yeah, it'd be very advantageous. I think share plans will always be a key element of remuneration, and it's been well understood for decades that it's a successful tool in incentivizing, retaining, motivating, attracting the right employees. So whether there'll be any fundamental shifts in how the share plans look, I doubt it. I think what would I like to see happen? There's a number of things there. I think one of the things. So I'm in Jersey, offshore trustee. I think we still see, and I've spoken to a number of advisors about this, and they often have frustrations around it. But the word offshore in the context of EBTs is nothing to be scared of. I mean, we still have conversations with potential clients around, the board is uncomfortable with the idea of it being an offshore trust for the EBT discretionary trust. I think just a move away from that sort of putting offshore and EBT in that box and feeling nervous around it, because we've seen enough stuff in the past to give the comfort. It gives what ultimately I think the UK government would want from a vehicle for facilitating share plans. And I think also, again, we've touched on it a number of times. I think certainly I've been lucky enough in my career to have excellent relationships with clients, and we have that dialogue, and you have the relationship where clients can just pick up the phone. Just an increase in that. I mean, anecdotally in the market, sometimes you hear that it's not until the client calls the trustee or the advisor or whoever it is that things start moving. I think just an improvement sometimes in those relationships, whereby you can be involved early doors in stuff, you can share ideas. Often there's challenges that we see that actually people don't automatically think an EBT can help with, but actually a conversation, and actually I certainly, and I think most trustees, love helping find solutions to challenges, and I think involving the trustee when things come up that they could potentially help with. That's what I'd like to see.
You got out of that one, Mr. Mate, didn't you? We'll let you off.
I know.
I'm going to jump to some of the questions now. I'm going to let you off the hook there, Cathy, for that one. Might come back to it if I don't have enough questions, but we've got 7 minutes left, so let's go to some audience participation. And the lovely Gabby, thank you ever so much for joining us, Gabby, and asking a fabulous question. So Gabby worries that there will be a lot of ShareSafe participants feeling the pinch in the coming months and withdrawing their ShareSafe savings. What should responsible employers be doing in the face of this? I don't mind taking this one. So I think a lot of the sessions that we now have as an industry in the share plans family, we have a lot of financial wellbeing experts that come along. So I think companies can really support financial and mental well-being massively throughout the time. If they can have much more than just ShareSafe as the safety net, then in times like this, they're going to be in a better position financially, but also mentally. The big thing I would say is that if 1 in 3 people only have ShareSafe as their savings, then actually this is their safety net. So if they are in desperate need, as much as a nightmare it is that they're going to miss out on something, they've actually saved money and they've got that as a safety net. So I think it's a plus that they've got it as a safety net. The negative is they might lose out on their share plan, but at least they've got some kind of savings in place. And as we build and give stronger financial well-being, and if we have auto enrolment, then you're going to have much more safety nets built up, so that your ShareSafe is the last thing you have to stop paying. So that'll be my take on it. Cathy, is there anything you'd add there?
No, that sounds really kind of sensible, and I think it's the key thing is communication as well, and letting employees know that this is what you're doing for them and how it's beneficial. So back to talking again.
Yeah, so I think one of the other things, Gabby, that we've seen with clients is just pointing out that people can defer for 12 months, so that if rather than coming out of the share plan, they have got that 12 months, which I know you worked hard to get into play. So, it gives that safety net again that, people can take advantage of that. So we are seeing companies go out with messaging around that as well, so people don't miss out. Okay, and we've also got a question from the lovely Martin. I think I know this guy. If tax efficiency should not be a key driver and the benefit is the most important consideration, should we be wedded to our UK approved plans, or should companies start thinking outside of the box more? Cathy. It's a good question.
That's a good question. Yeah, like tax is obviously a driver, but I don't think it should be the only driver. We're quite lucky in the UK that we do have so many tax efficient plans. I always think there is, like, for example, with EMI, people go, I want an EMI plan. You go, oh, I don't think you qualify. They go, well, we're not going to offer anything because we can't do EMI. They can't distinguish. EMI's become such a byword for a share plan that people will not do it. So if it can't be EMI, which I think is kind of the wrong approach, I always think that clients should figure out what they want to do commercially, and then us lawyers can figure out if there's a way to do that on a more tax efficient basis or not. And you know, we haven't talked about today growth shares, the dreaded JSOP, but all of them can deliver some benefit. But I think the headline should be commercially, what do you want? Do you want people to stay to an exit? Do you want people to stay for a couple of years? How do they get value? And then put a wrapper around it. So that would be my thoughts.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to throw one question at you for both of you. Okay, you have got a magic wand. Okay, you can change anything that you want. You can give me hair, which I'd love you for if you could do that. No, but on a share plan, what would you change to make the share plan world even better than it already is? Tom.
Oh, I think, to be honest with you, it largely goes back to my answer to the previous question. It's greater familiarity around the mechanisms that are out there across the industry better. So, because I think I did a talk a few years ago with with another industry body, just trying to kind of clear up some of the uncertainty and the myths, and give a bit more information around, again, specifically EBTs, because that's my primary focus to a certain extent. But an increased understanding generally around all the different elements and parties that are involved in your share plans, I think would help significantly.
Brilliant, thank you. And Cathy, 30 seconds. What are you going to go for? Magic wand.
In kind of contradiction to what I just said, I would review EMI and make the qualifying test a little bit more purposive, rather than having to go through actually qualifying criteria. You know, it's a good tool, and we should use it well. Brilliant.
What I do is I would ensure that all companies collect email addresses, because what I've seen is that you know, the more email addresses you have, the easier it is to communicate. Everyone's got phones, everyone's got laptops, well, not everyone, but you know, you can easily you know, get the messaging out. It's cost saving, it's good for ESG, it's very green, so that'd be it. So last 30 seconds, I'd like to just thank the audience. You've been absolutely superb asking those questions, some brilliant questions. I'd like to thank you to all our sponsors. Without them, we could not do today. You know, we couldn't pay Cathy and Tom these thousands of pounds that they get in for this session. So no, thank you very much to all the sponsors. You've been superb, and thank you to the speakers as well. So a big round of applause. Please, you know, pass on the video to all your friends and colleagues, and they can watch it on the beach somewhere. And we'll be back again in a few months. But thank you very much, everyone, for your time. All the very best.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.